from the top.
From the top. Talofa lava, kia ora koutou, Graham Smith here with the Tapatoru program. Here I am with my colleagues, Saylene and Pale. We're going to be talking about Pacific Cultural Centredness. So I wonder whether, Saylene and Pale, whether you could introduce yourselves and then we'll get into it from there.
Cool. Talofa everyone. My name is Pale Sauni. I'm Samoan born and educated and grew up here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. I have a role with Ako Aotearoa as the Pacific Priorities and Cultural Lead. I'm very excited to be part of this conversation today.
Talofa, lava everybody. My name is Saylene Ulberg. I'm Robin to Batman over here and part of the Pacific team here at Ako Aotearoa, and we look after Pacific Cultural Centredness.
Fantastic. And thank you both so much for agreeing to create these short videos with me. So the first question is just a broad question. What is Pacific Cultural Centeredness?
Look, the word competency has been around in education and health communities for years in Aotearoa. Competency seems to be something that people tick a box and say, I've been to a workshop, I've now achieved competency. Pacific people see it quite differently. We want you to focus in on each individual group that represents Pacific. So if I'm Samoan, as we are, or Tongan, or Niuean. So we have probably up to 18 different groups here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And those groups want you to center in or be centered around how we think and feel. So when you're coming to engage with each of us, we all have different languages. They may sound the same. And we all have different ways of seeing the world, and especially our values, whilst they might look very similar, but the way we practice them is quite different. So if you take something like the kava or ava ceremony, that's often seen as something that's common amongst all our groups, but it's actually valued quite differently by each of the cultures. So if you're coming to engage in a kava or ava ceremony with us, you would center in on that particular ethnic group in the way that they do it safely.
Yeah, so within we have 9 main Pacific groups here in Aotearoa. And so what we've done in consultation with these Pacific communities is we've started to look at cultural values and what's most important to these Pacific communities. And so the Pacific Cultural Centeredness looks at the 4 cultural values that have been selected by these communities that they want you to focus in on when you're dealing with them as communities and as learners.
So with Tapatoru, when we started, we looked at values that came from kaupapa Māori or Mātauranga Māori, and we talked about whanaunatanga and manaakitanga and what else, aroha and wairuatanga. So just maybe to illustrate the point, can you just give us some examples of what some of those values might be? You don't need to go through every single group, but let's pick a group or a couple of groups and perhaps just give us some examples.
The good thing about being Samoan is that we can speak to the Samoan and let the Tongans take care of themselves with their red flags. So the 4 that Samoan communities put forward as being most important for us, firstly is our spirituality. The second one that we put forward is service. And the third one is our humility. And the last one is, if you like, our spirituality. Now, they all interrelate, but they're also quite separate in the way that they're practiced or adhered to. When you listen to the other groups, they're very similar, but they may use words like honesty or integrity, or I think another group was...
Respect is another one I've seen come up in a lot of those modules. So, yeah.
And reciprocity. So they're all kind of interchangeable, if you like, but principally, the things about all the Pacific groups are the values are really around those spiritual, service, community, family, and then, if you like, their respect. It's really around those high principle values, which they've all, in the consultation process, have said it's really important that they're not negotiable when engaging with our communities or centering in on who we are as an ethnic group.
The fact that they're non-negotiable, you use that word, that's come up in some of our discussions too when we've been talking about Māori cultural values as well. So it's great to kind of reinforce that point. Can you just draw a quick comparison between Pacific cultural centeredness and Māori cultural capability? Just if there's differences there or similarities, if we could just tease those out.
I think one of the things in my mind, Graham, that often is either the same or different is our spirituality. Māori often talk about an indigenous god called Io, or they relate to things around the marae. For Pacific people, since the missionaries came to the islands, we have God and nothing else. Our indigenous gods have been replaced So where Māori have indigenous names like Tangaloa, we did too in Pacific. As soon as the missionaries came, they got replaced by having God or the deity or the belief in scripture. And so quite different in the way our spirituality is then practiced through the values. So if you take an example, I guess, karakia. So Māori for karakia will have pretty rigid karakia for everything. And it's the same karakia for grace. So it might be for lunch, it might be for dinner. For a Pacific person, being prayerful, the prayer is quite different, or grace is quite different for each meal, because it's practiced differently to how Māori would do it with what Māori call karakia. Often you see on programs, come to this hui, and we're going to start with karakia. For Pacific, it'll come to this hui, and it'll start with tatalo, which is a completely different way of saying karakia. I guess those are the differences when you're centering in on Pacific being different to Māori in that context. You might know some other things.
Well, I was just thinking about, the agreement within Te Ao Māori on, the cultural values within Te Ao Māori. Manaakitanga, it's generally agreed, within Te Ao Māori that those are values that are adhered to. And as we were talking about, Pacific cultural centeredness, each Pacific community has different values, and that's what makes us different across the Pacific. We tend to be lumped into one group as just being Pacific and that we all have the same values, but in actual fact, that's not true. Each Pacific community has their own cultural values.
Awesome, guys. That's fantastic. All right, let's leave that one there, and we'll be back next week with another short video like this.